Okay, so going through the first paper that you guys sat, which was component 2, health and performance. Just a key reminders on the front sheet, make sure your surname's entered here, first name's there. Weirdly enough, not everybody got that bit right. Centre number and candidate number in there. This little bit of information reminds you what you can and can't do, what colour pen you should be using, what type of pen you should be using, and the fact that you can actually use a calculator on both of the PE exams as a reminder as well, particularly helpful with graphs. Turning over to the first page, we've got some key bits of information, making sure that we fill out the cross, making sure if we made a mistake, we put a line through the cross. And as you can see on the first question, just as we talked through, we've got a process of elimination and a process of breaking down the question. So the first one says, which of the following states one endurance athlete would use carbohydrate loading? So what we need to do is, if we're not 100% sure on the answer, and even if we are, we just make sure that we're responding to the question correctly, so we go through each one. So the keywords to identify: one, which the exam board have highlighted in bold for us, endurance athlete and carbo loading are kind of the key bits of that information. Now we know to do with strength, carbohydrate loading has nothing to do with strength. To repair damaged body tissue after injury, we know it's to do with protein. To increase energy stores, we know we need carbohydrates in our diet for energy. And to lose weight, we know that's not really anything to do with carbohydrates. So that leaves us with one obvious answer, which is C. So once we've clearly made sure we're happy with C, put an X in the box so we know that we're happy with that one. And again, with less information that might actually be used further down in the actual exam. So information about other areas might come up in later exam questions. So processing these questions is just as important for the question and making sure we get the complete mark, but it's also important to make sure as we go through the rest of the questions we can refer to correct terms, to correct definitions and correct key areas. Okay, so moving on to the second question then. Again, breaking down the question, it's looking for one thing and one thing only. So which one of the following is an example of gamesmanship? So you've got three keywords of gamesmanship. You've got sportsmanship, and you've got deviance. So they're the three key words. If you were to rank them, gamesmanship is probably in your middle, sportsmanship is your top, and deviance is your bottom. Sportsmanship is when you play within the rules. Gamesmanship is you play within the rules, but you tend to bend them, not break them, however, and deviance is when you tend to break the rules. So what you need to do when you go through this question is make sure you're processing each of the key areas. Again, you can identify them with numbers, or you can just put a simple cross. So which one we're looking for gamesmanship? So shaking hands at the end of the match is a nice thing to do, generally called a good sport. So we're going to put number 1 next to that one, sportsmanship. Taking performance-enhancing drugs to win a 100-metre race is against the rules. So we're going to go on this one, unfortunately, with deviance. Claiming a catch in cricket when you know the ball has hit the ground first. Now you don't decide whether that's a catch or not, that's up to the umpires. However, pretending that it was or wasn't, that's going to come back to you're not breaking the rules, but you're bending them somewhat. So we're going to have to put number 2 there. Accepting the referee's decision without arguing is clearly a nice thing to do. In fact, more footballers should do it. And it's generally, again, seen as a good sport. So that's number 1. So again, we go back to the question. We're looking for gamesmanship, which we've identified as a number 2. There's only one answer that for us that sticks out, and that's C. So we put a cross in the box there. Again, what we've also got is some examples that, again, we could use later on if a question comes up with examples, sportsmanship, gamesmanship, or deviance, which actually it does. Going on to C, identifying the type of guidance from the description. So again, we know there are key types of guidance. Again, it's told us the answer to the types of guidance that there are. Again, helpful for a later question. The use of demonstration to help guide the performer to reproduce a movement. Now the key bit here is reproduce. Okay, so when somebody does a demonstration for you, you will generally watch that demonstration. So with that information, we know clearly there's only one option here. So when we look at watching, we're looking at visual. Now verbally, it doesn't give us any specific information, whether that person just talked us through it, mechanically it doesn't physically say how we were helped through it, or manually it doesn't say how we were physically assisted with something. It says reproduce a movement, so clearly we've looked at that movement. So visual is the only answer on this one here. Which one of the following affects optimum weight? Now this is a key topic area that I think not a lot of people have revised very well. There's clear things that affect optimum weight, and the only one on this list that affects optimum weight is bone structure. Okay, so optimum weight is the best type of weight for you to be for your sport at that given time, for your height and for your age. So it makes you effective at your sport. And then you obviously get some people who are quite tall, which is helpful for certain sports like rowing and basketball. And the bone structure is the kind of the key one on that one. To do with fitness, how fit you are or how unfit you are will help you become an optimum weight. Again, the race, not massively going to affect your optimum weight. And with age, people tend to put more weight on, but again, it doesn't affect your optimum weight, not like your bone structure does, because you can clearly only be a certain weight for the bone structure that you have. Moving on to the next question then. So a graph question, which was disappointing across both papers, although these two questions most people got right. So using the data in figure 1, which club receives the highest match day income? Again, so you've got 3 bits of information. Some people cleverly kind of coded it actually on, so they wrote next to, for example, Real Madrid, this was commercial, and they wrote it on all of them so they could just see clearly things sticking out to them rather than focusing on colours. The answer for this one, which club receives the highest match day income, was clearly Manchester United, because you've got match day and match day, and this was the highest income that was recorded. So Manchester United was again the only option on this one. But again, just putting little bits of information on the paper helps you break down that question. Moving on to using the figure 1 to see which one has the lowest income from media. Again, you need to look at the code for media. We need to look at which ones are the lowest across, and what sticks out for us is Bayern Munich on this question here. Again, just by clearly labelling which section is which for each club, make sure that the answer sticks out to you. Again, you can go through a process of elimination, so you could rank them if you like. So this is in 4th position, this one's in 2nd position, this one's in 3rd position, this one's in 2nd position, and this one's in 1st position in terms of money that they've made. And that's the multiple choices done. Okay, some nice easy question to get us started after the multiple choice. We've got a person, again the names will always change from paper to paper. So Asif has recently moved to a new area. To help him make new friends, he joins this local football team. So basically when we're looking at joining that, identify the type of health benefit for Asif when making new friends. So benefit is our key word there. So we know the benefits for doing any physical activity is PES. So we have physical, emotional and social. Making new friends is the key indicator for which one of those 3 areas, whether it's physical, emotional and social. So again, it should only fit the last area, and that's one of the key examples of social benefits. So we've got to be able to write social in this key area. Double check it's only worth 1 mark. That's literally all you need to write for 1 mark. Second one again, only worth 1 mark. So B, give an example of emotional health benefit for Asif joining the school football club. So it's now asking us to go through number 2. Now if we've made a mistake on number 1 here, it's actually reminding us what topic area this comes from. It's given us emotional. So if we need to go back and correct because we've misread the question or we've been too vague in this answer, that's not a problem. Just please make sure you refer to social in that response. So giving an example of emotional benefit, there's loads of examples what we've talked about. So stress is always a number 1. So reducing or relieving stress, particularly with school and exams. So reducing stress, literally for 1 mark is all you have to put to be able to get that 2nd mark. You can have things like make him feel good, increase self-esteem, take his mind off exams. They're all appropriate responses to have. But again, keep things simple. We've talked about having an example or 2 for each of the key areas that just stay in your brain. They're easy to recognise. Things like making new friends, stress relief, for examples that stick in your mind. Okay, moving on to the next question, 3. Explain 2 ways mental rehearsal can help improve performance. So again, we've got to be confident with the topic area of mental rehearsal, and it's asked for 2 ways to be explained. Now, explain being the key word. Now, this one's worth 4 marks. So in order to get those 4 marks, and it's given us 2 ways to explain, we've got to be able to break each way down into 2 segments. Okay, so ways we can get 2 marks for each of those sections. First of all, we've got to talk about something specific. So in the first response, we've got allows visualisation, which is linked to mental rehearsal. We've then got to go and explain how that helps to get that 2nd mark. So allows visualisation of the course to be completed, so more familiar with the course during performance. So again, sometimes you'll see a Formula 1 racing driver before they go out on their qualifying lap, visualise the course, when they're going to turn, when they're going to brake, what pressure they're going to put on, how they're going to attack that corner, how they're going to set certain sections up. So that's visualising the performance before they've even begun. Again, going on to the second one, we've got to say a simple statement. So recalls previous success and performance. So knowing you've done something well before, it could be taking a penalty, for example. Knowing you've scored a number of penalties in training the week before this session enables you to recall which side you went for, the success, the feeling, the processes that you went through during that penalty. This enables your performance and confidence to increase. So you've got confidence in your performance and you're more likely to do well. Again, it's a simple point, then fully explained afterwards to get that second mark. There is a third kind of angle you could have gone through, which is reducing negative thoughts or anxiety, therefore maintaining your focus on the performance rather than worrying about things that could occur and how you would respond to them. So it's kind of a third angle you could have gone down for the mental rehearsal marks. Again, when it says explain, we're looking for that initial point and then an explanation as to what that point means. Always refer back to that question. 2 ways mental rehearsal can help improve performance. So you needed to say the way and then how it could help improve performance. Okay, so question 4. Again, it's asking you to refer to figures. It's got figure 2 and figure 3. Figure 2 being a shot putter, figure 3 being in a netball match. And that's specific. It's not a type of skill. It's during a match. So then it goes on to say figure 4 shows the open and close skills continuum with a box for open and a box from close. It's asked you for 4A to label figure 4. So you've got figure 4 above you and you must label it to show whether 2 activities would be placed on the open and close continuum. Now this one's dead simple and a lot of benefit of the doubt marks, BOD marks, were given. You basically have a closed and an open skill here. You have a closed skill because it's repeatable, the environment generally doesn't affect the performance, it's something you do on your own, you initiate, you complete the action without any external factors affecting you, and that's a shot put. A netball match, being in the middle of a netball match, depending on what the score is, where the positions are, players, injuries, etc., make it one of the good examples for open. So the expectation in the boxes here would be that you'd write netball in open and shot put in closed. Now some of you put it slightly to the right or to the left of each of those boxes and got given the marks. A number of you tried to put those in towards the middle, to which no marks were given because it shows that you haven't clearly identified the skill as being more open or more closed. So in order to get 2 marks there, you needed to place netball in open and shot put in closed. I'll do that right now. The boxes are quite dark, which is slightly annoying, unfortunately. So I'm going to put it just by the side and just next to it here. Okay, linking to that same question, and you'll notice when there's an A, B, C, D kind of question, those questions start with an initial point and it refers back to that point throughout each section. So again, because it's B, it's referring to the information we've just discussed. Describe the difference between open and closed skills. Okay, as you can see, in order to respond to that question for 2 marks, we've got to be able to talk about both the types of skills. So we start with the initial open skills. So in open skills, the environment is constantly changing. Key point there, I've identified the open skill and described it, and that's what the question's asking, so I get the initial mark. Whereas, great practice, always compare. The answer is looking at 2 different ends of a spectrum, so we're comparing, so we're connecting the statement. So whereas is an important key word here. Whereas in closed skill, the environment is stable. We don't need much more detail for this. It's a simple describe the difference for a 2-mark question. We don't need to add examples. Had it said explain the difference between the 2, we would have had to go through an example and apply the information through an example. But in order to get the 2 marks, we simply had to explain what closed and open was. Okay, so an explain question crops up again, and as you can see there's no A, B, C and D, it's a question in isolation. So question 5, some lifestyle choices have a negative impact on performance and physical activity in sport. There's multiple ones, however this one's asked for a specific one for you to look at. Explain how drinking alcohol can negatively affect performance. Now that word explain is a big indication as what I need as an exam marker. 3 marks is a second area, so I'll give you an example of what we need to include to break those 3 marks down. Okay, so as we've spoken about before with explain questions, we'll be looking for a connective, which is underlined in this response. With the last question we looked at, we needed to identify a point. So the first point is, one of the negative effects of alcohol is it can lead to dehydration. The reason for that goes on to get us our second mark, as it's a diuretic, so something that makes us urinate excessively. Therefore is where I'm able to access the third mark. I don't get a third mark for writing therefore, but it puts me on the path to access that final mark. So I get 2 initial marks where it can lead to dehydration and as it's a diuretic. So just explaining what the problem is and why alcohol causes that problem. I've then got to bring it back to the performance. It says that in the question, how it can negatively affect performance. So I'm not looking for anything positive. Therefore, performance will drop as the individual may suffer headache, dizzy spells, unable to focus on the game. So the point is there, the identification of the negative impact on health, expand of how alcohol causes that impact, and then finally bringing the question back round to respond to the second part to look at how it negatively affects performance for 3 marks. Pretty simple question. Most people, unfortunately, were looking at 1 out of 3 on this question. Again, being able to understand the problems associated with alcohol and then being able to expand them is a key area for revision. Another graph question. Weirdly enough, this graph picture isn't great, and this is something the example can and may do in your actual exam. As I said, this is a paper that they've already produced. The key at the bottom of football, rugby and cricket is something that rugby and cricket are very similar looking and are not clearly identifiable, so we have to look at the patterns. And the first thing we would advise you to do is label them. That way we can make decisions based on the question. Like we talked in the past, 6 has got more than 1 section, so we know we're going to have to refer to the graph in multiple ways. So processing the graph and looking at the information first is the best way to start with this question. So figure 5 shows the amount of live television coverage by Sky Sports of 3 female sports in the UK between 2011 and 2015. We then look at the graph itself. Down on the side, we've got TV coverage in thousands of hours. So obviously we go from 0 to 6,000 hours. Some of us miss or didn't see or didn't read that part and only quoted 6 hours, 2 hours, 3 hours. On the bottom, we've got years. So we go from 2011, 2012, 13, 14 and 15. Okay, so as you can see, first thing, we've got our graph clearly labelled so it's easy to access. We then go to 6A. Using the data and figure at 5, predict, which is one of the keywords like explain, identify, justify, predict. So they're saying what's most likely to occur. There's no evidence to say it is going to occur, it's most likely to occur. So this one's predict the most likely trend in the coverage of women's cricket on Sky Sports in 2016. So what we have to do is look at the graph, and we've got a trend that's clearly identifiable. Women's cricket has been increasing all the way up since 2012. So from 2012 all the way to 2015, we've seen nothing but an increase. That gives us one choice and one choice alone to the response. Nothing at the moment from that graph indicates that there will be a downward trend, so we have to suggest that increase is the correct response. Going on to question B. So responding back to that question, using the data in figure 5, state 2 reasons to justify your answer for A. So after I've made that answer of an increase, I have to justify that information. Okay, so for B, using the data in figure 5 to state those 2 reasons. 2 reasons being an important part to the question, 2 marks available, so we're only getting 1 mark per reason. Justify your answer. So you're giving us a reason why you said increase. So one of the first things which we've already identified is it's continued to increase from 2012. So it's gone all the way up from 2012 all the way to 2015. So it's already continuing to increase, would be a natural adjustment and selection for that reason. Going on to the second reason, it's the greatest increase of all 3. So it's likely to continue. It's clearly had a good following. Again, this is just 2 potential reasons because it's a likely trend. You're not saying these things have happened. You're suggesting that they will happen because they have continued to happen over the last few years. Again, that will get us 2 marks. Moving on to C then, again linking to that same chart. Analyse the data in figure 5 to determine the change in patterns, keyword, in live television coverage of women's football. Now you've got to be careful here. We've been talking about cricket for the last 2 questions, not to get confused. It's been really specific for us and given us between 2011 and 2015, where actually that's the whole graph. So it's asking you what's actually occurred, what's changed during those years. Again, we have to look back at the graph, and we've got 2 key areas where it changed. If we look at the early years, 2011 to 2013, it stayed the same, or it plateaued. So there was no key changes during those years. We then go from 2013 to 2014, it had a dramatic increase, going on average from 3,000 hours of TV time to 5,000 hours. 2 key points. We can even go to the third key point to say it's reached its peak on the last year of 2015, where it's reached up to 6,000, and it's the most of all 3. So coming back to get 2 marks for that, in order to get those marks, we identify 2 reasons. First one, it increased dramatically between 2013 and 2014, as we've shown with our graph. And again, coverage of football plateaued between 2011 and 2013. What we've then got is a stark change. It's done one thing and then it's changed and done another. So even though it hasn't changed between 2011 and 13, it's changed since then, which makes the 2 areas key areas of change, and that's how I'd get 2 marks for that question. Not a great question on the whole, this one. Shivani is a 200-metre runner and is using smart targets to help set herself a goal for the new season. Explain, that keyword again, why Shivani would use measurable and time-bound targets in her training. Now, the exam board have then broken that down for you. So they're going to give you 2 marks for your explanation around measurable and 2 marks for your explanation around time-bound. Keywords in there. We've got the 200-metre runner, so we know her type of event. She's using smart targets to set herself a goal for the new season, so it's up and coming. So you then need to break down what measurable and time-bound are, and then give an example to get that 2nd mark for explain. So with explain questions, we know we're looking for connectives. We know we can't simply put 2 simple sentences because it said the word explain. We've got to refer to the actual keyword in this question, but we wouldn't get a mark for saying the word measurable. However, it makes sense to use it as a starter. So measurable targets enable Shivani to see her progress. So where she started and how she's doing. That's going to get you that initial point. We've then got to relate it back to her training. So the word so is our connective here. So she can see if her training is working. Now, if this was a 3-mark question, we'd then go on and add an extra point to say she can make adjustments if necessary. So if it's pushing her on further than she needs and she's feeling tired, she can take some things out. If she's not working hard enough, she maybe needs to adapt her training to be ready for the start of the season. Same with time-bound. We have that initial point, so a time-bound target gives Shivani a definite point when the target must be achieved. So basically an explanation of time-bound, but referring to the person in the question, so relating our information to the question. We get that 1st mark there. Therefore, being our connective this time. Again, if you don't have these connectives, you will not access more than 1 mark. So therefore, this makes her more motivated to work hard. Now, in order to work hard, knowing that you've got a deadline coming up, which you guys are very good at, it will sometimes make you work harder on the last few days to make sure everything's finished, rather than spacing it out periodically and making sure that you're working at a certain session speed or size, or how many hours you need to attend. Okay, so question 9, another explain question, and a whopper with 6 marks for 2 sections for this question. Again, unfortunately, this question wasn't done very well. It's clear that most of you are aware of what concurrent and terminal are, but trying to get those 2nd and 3rd marks just seemed difficult for most. So a man is the coach of an under 10 girls football team. Explain using an example when a man would use concurrent and terminal feedback with their players. The example of them broken down the question into I and II. They've given you concurrent and terminal as headlines, and they've then asked you for 3 marks to explain with that example. Question 8. David is a tennis player, so we need to use a tennis example. A balanced diet is essential for his performance. So the question, that's just information, and some questions will give us information which help us respond to the actual question. So the question is, explain using an example how vitamins or minerals can help David's tennis performance. Well, the first thing we've got to look at are what are vitamins and minerals. And if you look to the side, vitamins and minerals are micronutrients, where we have carbohydrates, proteins and fats, and macronutrients. So what we've done is applied our knowledge to that topic area already. We've also identified it's 3 marks, it's explain, and it's using an example. So the key reminder for this one is we've got to use a connective, we've got to use an example, it must relate to tennis, as that's what the question is specifically looking at, and we've got to talk about micronutrients. Okay, so explain, we need a connective. We need a clear connective, we need an example, and we need to be able to explain both of the types of feedback identified. Concurrent then, the first initial mark is saying what it is, dead simple. Most people access this mark. So concurrent feedback can be given at the time of the skill being executed, so it's during the play. That's your first point. That doesn't need to be connected, but it can if you wish. Next point. This is essential during a training match as it allows the coach to provide feedback during play. So you've applied that information of it's happening during a skill to the situation in the question. Here's your connective. For example, it hits two birds with one stone. We're expanding a point and we're answering the question using an example as requested. For example, the coach may shout to the team to push up and create an offside tactic. Any example there is appropriate as long as it's during play or during a training session. We then go on to terminal with the same structure applied. We need to explain what terminal feedback is. That gets us the initial mark. And if that's all you know, then from writing that, you can then still go on and try and apply an example to it, even if you can't fully explain it. So terminal feedback is given after the skill has been completed. This is valuable as it allows time to talk and explain in more depth the instructions. For example, again, you can see our connective there. Talk through when a tactic like the offside trap could or should be used and its risks. So we've kind of linked the two examples there together. We've got that initial mark on that second question here because we've said what it is. We've then gone on and explained what it meant, and just before we've got our final connective. For example, we've then applied that example that we've just discussed with point 1 and point 2, which responds to the question. So in a question that looks pretty straightforward, a number of people drop marks with just the style of how they approached it. The style, no matter what topic we're talking about, it could be we're talking about carbohydrates and proteins in this question, is still the same. Identifying what the point is, explaining what that means, and then applying that example. And then you're fully answering that question. So that first initial point, as discussed in the question, looking at a micronutrient, so either vitamins or minerals. You don't have to do both. It's giving you the option with the word or. So vitamins are micronutrients that maintain health. So an explanation of what a vitamin is, it's a micronutrient and it maintains health. That gets you the first initial point. So identifying what a vitamin is. Saying how that applies to David then, it's reducing the risk of illness. So we've then gone in to explain what the thing is and what it does, reduce the risk of illness. That gives us our second mark. Our connective, allowing, we haven't put a full stop there and then just put for example. We've put allowing. Allowing David to continue to train, straight play, to improve his performance will get us that third mark during his tournament, during his match, long matches, etc., all applicable tennis examples. As you can see, the structure of an explain question is the same no matter the content. You need to identify the thing of what it is, what it does, and then apply it through that example. Dead simple. 3 marks. Again, a lot of people drop marks on this question, some no marks at all. Question 10, another data question. As you can see, they keep cropping up and they have slightly different topics when they come up. Roger's tennis coach carried out an analysis of Roger's last match. The data collected is shown in table 1. So the data on the left-hand side is key skills in tennis, and the data on the right-hand side is the information he's collected. So sometimes it's things like how many aces, 5. When we look at the first serve percentage, that's out of all the first serves he's done and all the first serves that went in, he'd obviously need to divide the amount that went in against all the ones that he did to times it by 100 to give him a percentage. Double faults is just a single figure all the way down to backhand unforced errors. Now the question itself is again looking at analysing data. Analyse the data to determine one area, not 2, not 3, not where try a few and see if that works. One area of performance, Roger's coach, not Roger, Roger's coach will want to feedback on to improve Roger's tennis performance overall. And we can see that this is worth 2 marks. So we're analysing data to suggest something to improve. Okay, so you can pick a number of things from that list. But again, we're looking to improve performance. So we're looking at potentially some things he's not doing very well. We're looking at his first serve percentage of out of 21% of all his first serves are going in, leading a huge chunk of his first serves going out. That's an easy one for us to pick. We could have also looked at backhand winners or backhand unforced errors. They're relatively low. Backhand unforced errors would be direct points to the other teammate too, as well as the first serve, making it more difficult for Roger to increase the chance of doing well in his first serve, which has typically got more speed, making it more difficult for the opponent to return. So how we word that then is like this. Number 1, to get that first mark, he will receive feedback on how to improve his first serve, as only 21% of these are going in. All we've done is send what we've seen there, 21% of the first serves are going in. Because our connective, without it we don't access our second mark, this gives his opponent too much of an advantage. So being able to step in on the first serve, making that second serve slower just to make sure it goes in, which means the player can then attack the serve rather than put himself in a defensive position, which a first serve will tend to do. You need a little bit of knowledge on tennis there. You could have gone down the angle he received feedback on his backhand, as he's losing too many points through unforced errors. Again, it's saying what you've seen, his backhand unforced errors, he's lost 11 points from those. Again, when you look at the forehand unforced errors, he's only lost 2. To get the second mark though, we must have a connective, and because is your key connective on this question. Okay, question 11 then. Obesity can be a consequence of lifestyle choices. 11. A, B and C, all to do with the same topic area. Again, that's what the example is showing you. The marks go up 1, 2, 3. So we've got some basic information. We begin to expand, and then we're going for some further information for the 3 markers. First question then, define the term obesity. Like we said before, knowing key definitions enable us to get those full marks. B, describe one lifestyle choice that would reduce the risk of becoming obese. Just one, and all it needs is a description to get those 2 marks. Finally, state 3 effects that obesity can have on health and well-being, 3 marks. And this is an easy 3 marker. It's not said explain, it's just asking you to state 3 effects that obesity can have on health and well-being. It's probably the easiest 3 marker you'll get if it ever says something like state or identify. Okay, 11A then. Obesity is excessive fat accumulation around the body. Basically, you're really over fat. Excessive fat is really important. Saying somebody's fat doesn't describe obesity. Obesity is when there's excessive fat, more fat than what a person should have. It's not over fat, it's not overweight, it's excessive, too much. Again, it's something really simple. It's looking for a definition, and that's your first mark. Going on to B then, describe one lifestyle choice that would reduce the risk of becoming obese. It's worth 2 marks, so we have to break the question down in 2. Describing the lifestyle choice. So by identifying it, we get that first mark. So the first example could be something like by taking part in regular exercise. That gets us that initial mark. We then have to say why that helps. So this is to use up any spare calories to prevent being stored in the body, to burn excess calories, to help reduce weight. Any of those explanations are fine. But to get that second mark, we have to say why. So describing that one lifestyle choice that could reduce the risk of becoming obese, we identify the choice and we say why for that second mark. Finally, that easy, nice 3 marker. We can literally write 1, 2 and 3 down the side just to help us out. We don't have to write a lot. We don't have to write any connectives. We're literally writing the 3 areas. So we've got 1, the increased risk of osteoarthritis. 2, increased risk of heart disease or attack. 3, increased risk of diabetes. Can have stuff like increased risk of stroke. You can have increased risk of osteoporosis. Osteoarthritis is joint pain because of the excess weight and demands you've placed on your body from being obese. Really simple, easy 3 marker then. Don't need any sentences, don't need any connectives, just 3 correct points. I've recently done our PEPs. This one should be relatively fresh in everybody's brain. Question 12. Samaru is following a personal exercise program, PEP, to improve his health. Explain why that is important that Samaru monitors his PEP on a regular basis. Now again, a lot of you wrote about this in your evaluation, so it should be something that's fresh in your brain. Explain again, without those connectives, you're going to be stuck on 1 at very, very best 2 marks. You must refer to the monitoring of a PEP and you must talk about it being done on a regular basis. So let's break these 3 marks down. Monitoring of the PEP allows Samaru to see if he is improving. Dead simple, say what you see. The reason why we asked you guys to take your heart rates and to see what was happening over those 6 weeks was to see if you're improving. This will, connective word statement there, motivate him to continue with the training program. So knowing that what you're doing is making a difference, if you jump on the scales when you're on a diet, in the middle of the diet, if you can see that weight's coming off, it motivates you to keep going. So that's your second mark. Allowing him to make further improvements to his health. Again, if he's not making any changes, he can adapt his program so he can make further amendments to his health. That third point is always going to be the same, motivating him to continue or allowing him to change and improve his program will be your middle bit that could change both on the positive and the negative. So that's the reason why it's important. It allows him to see if he's improving, motivate him to continue, or allow him to adjust what he's doing, which enables him to make further improvements to his health. 3 marks, 2 connectives, only going to get 2 and 3 marks if we can make those points link to our initial point of to see if he's improving. Again, question 13, something we've recently looked at and something we've recently been doing. Mechanical guidance can be used when practicing new techniques in sport. State using examples, so again it tells us we must have an example of each, one advantage and one disadvantage of mechanical guidance when teaching a trampolinist to somersault. So it's given us the example we must declare. We can't just go off talking about a rugby player or a 100-metre track, and unfortunately a number of people did that. Again, skim reading the question, not breaking down the question, not underlining key things, making sure we're referring to exactly what the question is looking for is a problem for a number of you. So, in order for us to answer the question, the exam board has broken down the advantage and disadvantage, which is great because sometimes we forget to do one or the other. It's also told us that we need to have 2 marks for each point. So, we need that example to fully expand on our point. Okay, so a simple advantage for this, mechanical guidance. If we think about the rig in our sports hall for our trampoline, we don't use it because it takes too long to use and we haven't got the right size belt. However, in order to do a somersault in one of those, you could be rigged in, and if you were to under-rotate and look like you're going to be landing on your neck, we would pull the harness and stop you from hurting yourself. So mechanical guidance, so it's something that's mechanical, where you're strapped in so that the person can take the weight of the other person without feeling any negative effects themselves and making sure they're pulling at the right time. So mechanical guidance will allow the trampolinist to use a harness when learning to somersault. We've given this the specific example of somersault, we must refer back to it. That gets us the first thing. We've looked at a harness. You could put mats, but harness is a better one for this example. So they can learn the correct technique without risk of injury. So the benefit of being in a harness is it reduces the risk of injury. Same with mats, reduces the risk of injury. So we said what the thing is through the example of using a harness, and we said why we'd use that harness to reduce the risk of injury for the advantage. Switch that around for the disadvantage. The trampolinist may become over-reliant on using the harness. So the problem with that example is if you've always trained using your harness, some people don't want to come out of the harness, so it makes it more difficult for them to progress because they then can't put that into a routine because they're strapped in. So I'm willing to practice without one, stopping their progress. So we're unable to get them any further assistance because they won't come out of the harness and perform the move on their own because they've become over-reliant. Using the example of the somersault, talking about harness in both examples, in order for the exam board to give you 2 marks, we have to say what the example is and why that affects them. So we've got risk of injury and no progress as to the justification for over-reliance and allowing to use the harness to learn the somersault in. 4 marks. Again, some people are losing 1 or 2 marks here. On the whole, it showed a good understanding of mechanical guidance, but not everybody applying to the right sport and the right move within the sport as well. Some people too vague with their responses. Okay, the only known marker that we had for this exam, normally for this exam you'd have 2, but because we only had an hour, we removed one of the 9 markers to make sure it fits in instead of the hour and 15 we're supposed to have. So question 14, Sky Broadcasting and BT currently pay 5.1 billion for the media rights for the Barclays Premier League, which is football if you're not sure. That's a statement that you're expected to refer to in your response. That is not the question. The question then goes on, discuss. Remember, a discussion is looking at positives and negatives. The impact of increased media coverage in sport, and this has gone really specific for the spectator and then the sport. So it's looking at two areas, not for the player, not for the managers, it's looking for the sport itself and the spectator. So when we break down this question and we plan, and it takes 2 minutes maximum to get a really good plan in, we're able to look at the question. We're looking at the positives and negatives, and we're looking at the spectator and the sport. So with a quick plan, again, not looking for a long period of time to make sure that we're covering all the aspects of the question, we can break the question down into spectator and sport, positives and negatives. Some of the key areas for spectators: it's more ways to see your team, it's more exciting as a team's better, you got more money. Some of the negatives, sometimes the lack of atmosphere at the ground, particularly if people stayed at home when it's cold and they'd rather watch it on telly, or the angles are better on telly. Playing times can be altered to fit the TV audience needs rather than what local buses or what local trains are on. And sometimes the costs of the fans, because you get more corporate people wanting to watch the games or be at the games for the atmosphere, sometimes the cost of the fans can rise. The cost of the kit, the cost of the season ticket holders, etc., etc., sometimes gets passed on to the fans. So the sport itself, having more money, so £5.1 billion is spread between the teams. So each team's get more money. It's the highest amount in any league in any country. So £5.1 billion just for people to watch the games that you play. That doesn't include all the other revenue that a team has. It increases the exposure. So better coverage from Sky and BT playing around the world increases your team's exposure, increasing the likelihood to get more fans, increasing the likelihood for your players to become role models, etc., etc. Some of the negatives for the sport then: the attendance figures may drop, which means you have less revenue, less people buying your pies, your alcohol, your drinks, your merchandise. And sometimes it can lead to unpopular rule changes to meet with the media's kind of need to make it more interesting. They don't like goalless matches, they want goals. So rule changes to make sure the game's exciting and more goals are scored can sometimes not be great for the team itself. You want a good defensive record, you want to win games, you want to play within the rules. Sometimes that's a negative. So how we can then structure a point. So we've picked one of those positive aspects and we've gone for the sport as our start. So one positive aspect of the sport gaining more media is the increase of funds. So that's our A1, our identification of the point. Gone on then to explain it. The teams have, so more funds that the teams have, allowing them, there's our connective, to buy better players. So we've gone on to establish an A2 point there. We've expanded and explained and played to a higher standard. This can lead to more success and greater fans and support. Going on to our A3, so we've analysed why that's a good thing for the sport. So we've looked at they get more money, it allows them to buy better players, to play to a higher standard, and can lead to more success and greater fans and support. You can apply that to loads of teams. You can think of Leicester City, for example, winning the Premier League and having more money when they got into the Premier League enabled them to buy and enhance their squad. But winning the Premier League, gaining more success, has enabled them to buy more players, improve their facilities and grounds, etc., etc. Now, 3 of these kind of paragraphs on any of those points there, you'd be looking at least a 7 out of 9. It's the ability to get the A1 linking to the A2 to the A3. 3 or 4 of those paragraphs, well written, concise, no spelling and punctuation errors, you'd be looking in that top bracket between the 7 and 9 mark. Again, even 1 or 2 of these paragraphs, if you're not familiar with the topic and the structure that were applied here, would get you at least to level 2. A number of people didn't leave level 1. A number of people just put a load of simple points, never expanding them, just listing all the way through a load of A1s. So they got stuck in level 1.